Halloween ended months ago, buddy. The words drifted through the cool Georgia night with a mocking ease that made several passing drivers glance toward the shoulder of the highway. Red and blue lights flashed across the wet pavement, painting long streaks of color over the road like shattered glass. Officer Caleb Whitmore stood beside a dark gray sedan with one hand resting on his duty belt and the other pointing toward a black judicial robe folded neatly across the back seat. A slow grin spread across his face as if he had already decided exactly who the man behind the wheel was. Marcus Ellison sat quietly with both hands visible on the steering wheel. At 52 years old, he had spent most of his adult life in courtrooms where raised voices accomplished little and patience revealed everything. The dashboard clock glowed 9:47 p.m. He had just finished a late hearing nearly 60 miles away and was heading home through steady spring drizzle. The smell of rain drifted through the partially lowered window. Water rolled down the glass in thin silver lines. Marcus looked at the officer and spoke calmly. "Good evening, officer." Caleb let out a short laugh. "You carrying that costume around for a reason?" His eyes moved toward the robe again. "Trying to play judge somewhere?" The remark hung in the air. A pickup truck passed, tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Marcus remained silent for a moment. Years on the bench had taught him that some people revealed themselves very quickly when given enough space. Caleb leaned closer to the window. License and registration. Marcus reached carefully toward the center console. The movement was slow and deliberate. The leather folder containing his documents was worn from years of use. He handed it over without argument. Caleb flipped it open. His expression changed slightly when he saw the name. Not respect, not recognition, just irritation. Marcus Ellison. He repeated it slowly. Then his eyes lifted back toward Marcus's face. Rain tapped against the roof of the sedan. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the dark sky. "You know why I stopped you?" Caleb asked. Marcus shook his head. "No, sir." The officer pointed toward the highway behind them. "You drifted across the lane marker." Marcus knew he had not. He remembered the empty stretch of road clearly. But he said nothing. Caleb seemed almost disappointed by the lack of resistance. He looked again toward the robe in the back seat. The garment appeared almost black-blue beneath the flashing patrol lights. "That's a pretty expensive costume," Caleb said. "Maybe you got somewhere important to be." Marcus could feel cold air moving through the crack in the window. He glanced briefly toward the robe. It was still carrying the faint scent of old wood, legal books, and the courtroom where he had spent the evening listening to families search for justice. To him, it was never clothing. It was responsibility. Caleb snapped the folder shut. "Stay right here." Marcus nodded once. The officer turned and walked back toward the patrol vehicle. The flashing lights reflected across puddles beside the road. For several seconds, Marcus watched the rain gather on the windshield. Then he slowly exhaled. Something about the stop felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not yet. Just deliberate. Like a story already written before either man had spoken. And standing beneath the spinning red and blue lights, Officer Caleb Whitmore seemed determined to play the author. Inside the patrol vehicle, Caleb Whitmore stared at the glowing screen mounted beside the steering wheel. Raindrops crawled across the windshield under the sweep of the wipers, disappearing into the darkness beyond the glass. The name Marcus Ellison remained displayed on the monitor. Caleb frowned. The system showed no warrants, no violations, no flags that justified the suspicion already forming in his mind. Yet something about the quiet man in the sedan irritated him. Perhaps it was the calmness. Perhaps it was the confidence that seemed untouched by flashing lights, authority, or accusation. Caleb had spent nearly 9 years wearing a badge. During that time, he had learned to trust his instincts, or at least what he called instincts. Tonight, those instincts told him that the man waiting in the sedan was hiding something. He clicked through several screens again. Clean driving record. Registered vehicle. Valid insurance. Nothing unusual. His jaw tightened. Outside, traffic continued flowing through the rain. Headlights stretched into long silver ribbons across the highway. Caleb grabbed his flashlight and stepped back into the night. Marcus remained exactly where he had been. Both hands rested calmly on the steering wheel. His posture had not changed. The dashboard light illuminated the edges of his face, while the rest remained hidden in soft shadow. Caleb stopped beside the window. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "May I ask why, officer?" Caleb immediately disliked the question. Not because it was disrespectful, because it was reasonable. I asked you to step out of the vehicle. Marcus slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. The clicks sounded surprisingly loud in the quiet night. He opened the door and stepped onto the wet shoulder. Rain mist drifted through the air, settling across his dark suit. The highway hummed beside them. Caleb studied him closely. Marcus stood just over 6 feet tall, composed and dignified despite the circumstances. The officer noticed the silver watch at his wrist, the polished shoes, the carefully pressed suit. None of it matched the story Caleb had already begun creating in his mind. "What exactly do you do for a living?" Caleb asked. Marcus answered without hesitation. "I work in public service." The response only deepened Caleb's irritation. "Public service?" he repeated. That could mean anything. Marcus glanced briefly toward the sedan where the folded robe remained visible through the rear window. "I serve the community through the legal system." Caleb followed his gaze and laughed softly. "That robe again." He shook his head. "You really expect people to believe that?" Marcus remained silent. Several seconds passed. Rain tapped against the patrol car. A transport truck thundered past, sending a wave of water across the shoulder. Caleb circled slowly around the sedan. His flashlight beam swept across the windows and interior. Then it stopped on a leather briefcase resting on the passenger seat. "What is inside the case?" Marcus answered calmly. "Court documents." Caleb turned toward him. "Of course they are." The sarcasm hung heavily in the air. Marcus did not react. Years in courtrooms had exposed him to every variety of arrogance, anger, and insecurity. What concerned him now was not the officer's attitude, but the direction the encounter seemed to be taking. He looked toward the distant highway lights disappearing into the rain, then back toward Caleb. "Officer Whitmore," he said evenly, "I believe it would be wise to contact your supervisor." For the first time, something hard flashed across Caleb's face. The request sounded less like advice and more like a challenge. And challenges were something he never handled well.